Do not put all of your proverbial eggs in the same basket. This is the number one way in which the majority of new government contractors get in the game. A prime contractor should not be hiring a subcontractor's employees. I hear this over and over again. It's the craziest thing I ever heard of. But a lot of people have gravitated onto this concept, and it's simply because they do not understand the business landscape. Hey, welcome to my channel. My name is Dr. Curtis A. Merriweather Jr., and welcome to my channel. Now, the purpose of this channel is to educate entrepreneurs, and the way we do this is through education, consultation, and training support services. Our goal on this channel is to help you lower your learning curve and accelerate your business profitability. Now, we want to do this by simplifying the process. Now, my channel is based on 27, almost 28 years of progressive experience. I want to share practical insights, experiences, and lessons learned based on advanced education. Many of you guys know last year, 2023, I obtained my PhD in management from Case Western Reserve University. Just a tremendously enriching experience. So on this channel, we want to disseminate that type of information to you in bite-sized chunks in a manner so that you can digest it. Now, as you are on the screen, you're going to see my URL. Please note my URL, my Instagram handle has changed. It is Dr. Curtis Jr., Dr. Curtis Jr. On Instagram. So please give me a follow. On the screen right now, you will see our URL handle for our website. That is 8figuregovcon.com. And you can go immediately to our course store library, browse around, look at the content. I'm sure you'll find something that can help you in your government contracting journey, whether you're a general government contractor, prime or sub, no matter where you are in your journey, or we have a course specifically for barbers and cosmetologists who want to jump knee deep in the government contracting fray. Okay, before we get into our topic today, I want you to like, I want you to share, and I want you to subscribe to the YouTube channel and hit the notification bell. So anytime I produce new content, you will be notified most promptly. Couple announcements before we jump into our topic. On February 6, 2024 at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be doing the next free, you heard me, free information session. Now, the session is free, but registration is required, and that information will be contained in the description box below this video. Richmond, Virginia, I'll be coming to you live. Me and my good friend Guy Timberlake will be live in Richmond, Virginia. We will be doing a fireside chat Q&A format on April 26, 2024 at the Richmond Marriott. Definitely log on to the site. Additional details will be there. You're going to see me and Guy Timberlake live in Richmond, Virginia, one day only for that particular event. It's going to be a great event. So you're going to want to register and get your tickets as soon as they go on sale, which will be in a couple of weeks. All right. Now that we got all that out the way, I want to get into my topic today. Now you've seen on the screen the topic, so you guys know the topic. So we want to just dig deep in this session, and we want to give you some information to help you better navigate this thing we call government contracting. So I want to talk about today the different phases of government contracting. I'm going to call them the major phases of government contracting. But before we get into our topic, I want to give you a couple very basic definitions just to make sure we're talking apples. We want to make sure that there's no misunderstanding and some of the terms I'm going to use. And these terms are going to be very relevant to federal government contracting. Now, there can be some applicability at the state, local level, but mainly on this channel, when I speak, I'm normally talking about federal government contracting. Okay. I do recognize that there are some overlap with we're talking federal, state, and local, and even international. But in this particular conversation, I'm going to focus on federal contracting in the United States of America. Okay. And forward operating basis where we have a presence and there's federal contractors being administered. That does happen as well. So let's get into a couple definitions to guide our conversation. First definition: socioeconomic status. When I'm talking about socioeconomic status, it is a position of an individual or group on the socioeconomic scale. So we're talking about social status and economic status when we're talking about socioeconomic status. So we put those two things together and we create a compound word. Now, this is determined by a combination of social and economic factors, which for our conversation today, it's going to include disability, ethnicity, gender, and location. Now, I'm just localizing this conversation for a government contracting context. We know there are a lot more permutations and variables when we start talking about socioeconomic status. We could talk about income and all these other factors. But for our government contracting conversation today, we're going to focus on disability, ethnicity, gender, and location. Now, when we start talking about socioeconomic status, the company's socioeconomic status is determined by the majority owner. He or she who has more than 51% of ownership of the company is where the socioeconomic status lies. For example, you can be a male, service-disabled, veteran-owned company, and you can have a female minority owner, meaning she owns 49% of the company or less. We're a minority owner. So I'm not talking about minority in terms of ethnicity. I'm talking about minority in terms of ownership stake. So you have a majority ownership and minority owner or owners. So I'm talking about minority from a ownership perspective. I'm talking about how many shares you own of the company, who has the majority stake. Whoever has majority of the company, that's where the social economic status is determined. So in my fictitious example, we had a male, a black male, who is a service-disabled veteran. The company's status can have 8A and SDVOSB. Because that male is majority owner, the female ownership is considered minority, and whatever the majority stake in the company is, that what determines status. Now, if we flipped it and the female is now majority owner, then we can claim woman-owned small business status. So whoever has the majority, one individual who has the majority of the ownership is where the social economic status lies. Okay, so be very strategic in terms of who you want to put forward. If you really want to play the social economic game, majority owner, 51% or more, is where that status is going to lie. So if you have a female and she's service disabled as well, she can, and she's located in, and the business is located in a hub zone, that female can be woman-owned small business, service disabled, veteran-owned, 8A, and depending on the location of the business, also be in a hub zone. And there's some other rules around that. Please refer to the SBA website for the latest and greatest in terms of guidelines to make sure where you fall in the fray. Now, we talked about social economic status determined by the 51% or majority owner, the person who owns more than 51% of the company. So a 50-50 won't cut it. If you have a 50% owner and someone else owns 50%, there's no majority. So in order for there to be a majority, someone has to have 51% of the company. So whoever has 51% or more is considered the majority owner. A 50-50 won't work. That is not majority. That is similar ownership. We need to have, someone needs to have an additional 1%. So if there's two people, one can be 51% owner, one's going to be 49. Whoever has 51% owner, that's going to determine the socioeconomic statuses that can be applied to the business. I feel like I beat a dead horse. Hope that makes sense. Now, what I want to talk about, I kind of went down a rabbit trail. If you are disabled and you are a veteran, there's the service disabled veteran owned status, small business status, so an SDVOSB. If you are a minority, an ethnic minority, this is anyone who's not a majority. This is someone who's not a white male. If you're not a white male, you are a minority. And I'm going to go ahead and give a news flash. Women also fall into the minority category. I know some women that are 8A company owners. I'm just saying. Gender, this is going to be primarily woman-owned small business. There's a status for you all as well. And then when we talk about location, if you're in an opportunity zone, also known as a hub zone, if you're in an opportunity zone, the business is in an opportunity zone, and I believe it's 34%. Please check the SBA website. 34% of your company is employed that works for the company, lives in a hub zone. You can qualify for that status. This also includes, folks who may be going to a local college or university. Typically, colleges and universities are located in the hub zones, but you will need to check the map. You will need to check the hub zone map to make sure that the business is A, in a hub zone, and in B, you're going to also want to check that same map to make sure that the employee base that you're putting in this 34%, to make sure they're located in a hub zone as well. Okay, that was definition number one, social economic status. Spent way more time there than I had intended. Second definition, prime contractor. New business owners give me this question all the time. What does it mean to be a prime contractor? The prime contractor is the contracting organization, the business that is responsible for completing a project under contract with a federal agency or project owner. Let me simplify it a little more. This is the person who has a direct relationship with the federal agency when we're talking about government contracting. So this is the person who signed the standard form that when they submitted the proposal to the federal government. That is your prime contractor. This is the one, the prime contractor is the one that DFAS stands for Defense, Finance, and Accounting Service. This is the organization that is paid when a contract action has been made. So although there may be some subcontractors, the one who gets a direct check from the federal government for said contractor, for said contract, is the prime contractor. Just trying to give you different ways of looking at the same thing. Some of these terms may be new to people on this channel. Now, the prime contractor must complete the project per the federal acquisition regulations, specifically the limitations of subcontracting clause. I did a whole video on this. Be mindful that the prime should be doing at least 51% of the work. Now, if you have not seen my video, I did a video about a month ago on the middleman strategy and why it's time to rethink your approach in 2024. I spent a lot of time on the limitations of subcontracting clause, even have some input directly from the federal government. We look at a post. There's a case, there's a federal case that's examined, and it talks about basically if you use middleman strategy, that your contract should be deemed technically unacceptable, which is the kill of death for your proposal. But I digress. Go watch that video if you want to learn more about the limitations of subcontracting clause. And if you drank the middleman strategy Kool-Aid, I definitely recommend you watch that video so you don't shoot yourself in the foot before you get out the gate good. Okay, now that we have a couple definitions out the way, I want to get into the 4 phases that you should be thinking about as a government contractor. What is the pathway to success? Number 1, you got to start off. You don't have to start off, but many companies start off subcontracting. I'm going to just leave it there. I'm not going to open it up because there's ways around that in certain situations. But most companies new to the space, they start off subcontracting. So I gave you a definition of prime contracting. He or she business owner who has a direct relationship with the federal government and are doing work responsible for the operations and success of said contract action. So when we talk about subcontracting, a subcontractor is a business entity or person. Now, I do not recommend any of my watchers and subscribers and students to be sole proprietors, but please avoid being a sole proprietor. But the definition, I want to make sure I'm dotting my I's and crossing my T's. It could be a business, S corp, C corp, an entity. I'm gonna just say LLC, even though we know it's a corporate structure, or a person. It could be a sole proprietor. Please avoid. We know the primary business types or partnerships, corporations, nonprofits, and limited liability corporations. We know those are the four primary entities we do business in and around. I've done a whole nother video where I talk about the business structures you need to think about, but let's keep moving. So a subcontractor is a business entity or person awarded by the prime contractor. So meaning someone else has won the award. That's the prime for the performance. And you're being asked to perform part of the work. Typically, the work is outlined in section C, section C, which is statement of work or performance work statement. So the subcontractor is a business entity or person who has been awarded a piece. So a subcontractor is a business entity or person awarded part of a contract from a prime contractor. You're going to do part of the work. Part of the work is normally outlined, or the total work is outlined in section C of a statement of work, performance work statement, normally contained within part of a solicitation or a request for proposal. And section C outlines the work. The prime contractor will determine which portions of the work they want to subcontract out. And we know that as prime contractors, we should be doing 51% of the work. That includes us as well as our W-2, our employee team. And then we can subcontract out. I'm going to recommend no more than 49%. Now, in theory, primes, you should be doing as much of the work as humanly possible for a whole bunch of reasons that I can't get into for this video because we'll go in a different direction. Now, so a subcontractor is a business entity or person awarded by the prime contractor the performance of part of the work or services of an existing contract between the prime contractor and the government agency. So the subcontractor has an indirect role in this work. Now, subcontractors are independent and do not have an employer-employee relationship with either the prime contractor or the subcontractors. Meaning, a prime contractor should not be hiring a subcontractor's employees. I hear this over and over again. It's the craziest thing I ever heard of, but a lot of people have gravitated onto this concept, and it's simply because they do not understand the business landscape. It's just ignorance. It's ignorance. But I digress. So you have an indirect relationship with the federal agency when you are a subcontractor. This is the number one way in which the majority of new government contractors get in the game. Now, I do not want you in any way to snub your nose on subcontracting. There are multi-billion-dollar businesses in this space. If I call their names, you know them. Lockheed Martin, Leidos, Harris Corporation, CACI, SAIC. The list goes on and on. These are multi-billion-dollar businesses, and they both prime and sub. So part of your strategy as a small business should be to prime and sub. But I would be negligent if I did not say, and I have to say this, you have less control as a subcontractor. Why? Number one, you didn't take the majority of the risk. The prime contractor did. And the prime contractor is going to do everything in there possible to minimize risk. So when contract shortfalls occur or there's reductions in force, the subcontracting force will be the first to be cut. I just need you to know it. It's a risk. We all take it. We all understand it. But I need you to know that's a risk. I need you to accept the risk and move forward smartly. Do not put all of your proverbial eggs in the same basket. We all start off with one subcontract, but you need to get 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm going to talk about the progression. And if you do the next 3 things I'm going to tell you, you're going to be okay. But you got to diversify your portfolio of business. Let's keep moving. Our first point was subcontracting. Number 2, this is the second phase, the second stage in your government contracting journey, which are sole source contracts. Sole source contracts. Now, you may ask, and I always like to make sure we're talking about the same thing. So when I talk about sole source contracts, these are non-competitive. Sole sourcing is a method of procurement whereby a purchase order is issued or contract award is made without a competitive bidding process. Since the supplier is the only source of supply for the required goods or services. Let me say this: when the government starts talking about only source, that is a very subjective term. It could be that it is the one of a few companies that they are aware of. Okay, so when they talk about only source, it doesn't mean it's the only source, because there's a variety of companies that can do it. Okay, but based on their parameters and their what they call a J&A, a justification authorization. When you do sole sourcing, especially for my 8As, the federal government has to fill out a form called a justification and authorization. If you are an 8A company, your business opportunity support specialist, also known as the boss, has to sign off. When you are a company, you are doing sole source. I'm gonna just pick on the 8As for a minute, specifically as an 8A company. When you go through that processing through the SBA, the Small Business Administration, what the SBA is basically saying, in the event that this company defaults, we're going to put the faith and credit of the Small Business Administration on the line to make said agency whole in the event that this business, this 8A company, defaults. That's why it's so challenging. That's why it's so much paperwork. That's why it's so much due diligence on the part of the federal government, specifically the SBA, when you go after these socioeconomic certified statuses. 8A, woman-owned small business, SDVOSB, HubZone. That's why there's so much paperwork involved, because there's varying levels of buy-in. And on the 8A in particular, I'm going to pick on them. The 8A in particular, if you default, the SBA will make that agency whole again. They're basically standing in the gap for you. And so when the federal government sees you're an 8A company, there's some level of comfort that if you default, that the SBA will make them whole again and satisfy some of the remedies that may have been incurred because they took a risk and went with you. Okay? Now, sole source contracts are contracts that can be issued without a competitive bidding process. Now, oftentimes, if you're doing a sole source contract, there will be a proposal, but it's going to be very synopsized. It's going to be 5 or 10 pages. You're going to talk about the service offering, probably give them a price, may even talk about management methodology, but it will not be a full solicitation response with a management plan, a technical approach, maybe security, volume, and past performance. You're going to give all of that, typically synopsized within about 5, no more than 10 pages, and you're going to give them a price. They're going to do the J&A. They're going to talk to the business opportunity support specialist. They're going to do a handshake with the SBA if you fall into one of those social economic categories, and they're going to award you the contract. Now, I synopsized that. I overly simplified it just so I can keep moving through this video. Now, this usually happens, talking about sole sourcing, when only a single business can fulfill the requirements of a contract. And I want to make sure this came from the SBA's website. I want you to know that this is subjective. There's never just one source, okay? But the government has to make a case for why they're giving you this work. Now, when I'm talking about sole sourcing, I'm talking about a specific contracting strategy, okay? Now, I want to also throw in here, just as a side, I'm going to drop in here real quick and I'm going to move out the way. This also includes micro purchases. So for those who do the micro purchase game, $25,000 or less, I'm even going to throw the simplified acquisition procedures in here. When they can go through a streamlined process to get to you and limit competition, I'm going to throw that in this category as well. Because typically a micro purchase is typically only one vendor. It's normally not a price shootout, okay? Now, there may be some permutations of that. Some agencies may do things a little differently, but all things being equal, in 9 out of 10 cases, I'm going to throw the micro purchase and the simplified acquisition procedure in this category. Now, I'll do future videos to kind of pull apart and tease apart some of the nuances, but for this video, let's just agree to that standard. Let's keep it moving. I got a couple more I want to get through, and I don't want this video to be super, super long. Third strategy, third phase in your government contracting journey. You got to eventually work up to the set aside. I mean, nothing I say here means you have to, but this is a typical progression. You may start off subbing, then you may move into sole source, and now you may be going after set asides. And reason why I put sole sourcing in second place and set asides third, sole sources are typically non-competitive. It normally comes down to a relationship. You made a relationship with someone within the federal government, and they decided to give you an opportunity, provided you had certain socioeconomic designations. Call it an 8A status. Call it a hub zone status. They gave you a set aside, a sole source. So the next progression is going to be a set aside. Now, the set asides are competitive. Sole sources are not competitive. Set asides are competitive. There is a price competition. There is a race to see who can provide best in class service based on some parameters. Okay. So when we start talking about set asides, a set aside contract means, number one, it's a contract for goods, equipment, construction, or services that are designated as a contract for which bids are invited and accepted only from qualified small business enterprises. So there's some type of announcement of a solicitation or request for proposal, and those proposals are accepted and evaluated. Okay. Qualified minority business enterprises or qualified women's business enterprises as appropriate. So a set aside could look like SDVOSB, Service Disabled Veteran Owned Small Business. It could look like hub zone or opportunity zones, kind of the newer term. But these are economically depressed regions, and the government's trying to stimulate economy in those regions. 8A, the 8A Business Development Program. Woman-owned small business. Those are your typical set-aside categories. So set-asides are set aside. It's a limited competitive pool based on the socioeconomic status. Let me also say this. Small business is also a set-aside category. Anything that is not full and open competition, meaning anybody can play, is considered a set-aside. Small businesses are set aside. Hub zones are set aside. 8A Business Development Program is a set aside. SDVOSBs are set aside. If it is not full and open competition, but it is yet a competitive process, which is unlike a sole source, unlike subcontracting, it is a set aside. And let me say this, even for my folks who are subcontracting, your primes are also trying to put these different socioeconomic statuses on their team, where they have to submit what we call a subcontracting plan. They want to see 8As, they want to see hub zones, they want to see service disabled veteran-owned small businesses, and they want to see woman-owned small businesses on the team. And they're going to show the federal government how they're going to diversify their team using these different set aside, these different socioeconomic categories. And oftentimes those numbers go into the thresholds for the federal agencies in terms of them hitting their subcontracting goals. Just FYI, it's kind of like they're double dipping. They don't like to say that, but it's true anyway. A set aside is a federal contract designated for small bidding purposes only. The portion of the contract is guaranteed to go to designated socioeconomic small businesses. And I gave you the different socioeconomic categories. Let's keep it moving. Last but not least, we got the full and open contracts. So we've talked about a progression. So many people are going to start out subbing. They're going to go from subbing to sole source contracts, from sole source contracts to set asides, from set asides to full and open. Now, every company is not going to go through this in a stepwise fashion. Some may start out subbing and jump immediately to set asides. Some may start off sole source and go from sole source to set aside to full and open. But this is just, I want to give you a hierarchy and kind of give you some insight. The thought process here is, as you go to the different tiers, as you go from subcontractor to sole source contracts, from sole source to set aside, from set aside to full and open, there is an expectation that you're building in the capability and the infrastructure necessary to play ball at the next level. So these 4 tiers, there's some assumptions in terms of your growth as a CEO and the development and competency growth of your team as you're able to scale to these next levels. Okay. You're putting in processes and systems and infrastructure necessary to compete at the next tier. What's needed to be a subcontractor starting off, you're going to need a little more to be able to do sole source contracts. If you can do sole source contracts at a certain level, a certain proficiency, there is reasonable to assume that you can compete on the set aside game. Once you've done quite a few set asides, you built in some financial capacity, your team is ebbing and flowing and humming and clicking on all cylinders, at some point you can make the foray into full and open competition. Now, when you see small businesses go to what we're going to call from 1 to 4, and I gave the numbers, subcontracting, the sole source, set aside, full and open. When you get to the full and open game, if you desire to sell, that is when you're that's when you're in the best position to do so, for a whole bunch of reasons we won't talk about here. Maybe I'll do a future video talking about the merger and acquisition process and what's required to sell your business and the multiples and all of that. But for today, we want to get to full and open competition. That is the granddaddy. That is where Leidos, SAIC, CACI, Raytheon, put your favorite prime contractor in that bucket. That's where they live most of the time, because that's where they have more and most of the control. So I'm talking about full and open competition. I'm talking about, this means all vendors are playing on the playing field and have the same opportunity to compete for an awarded contract. Procurement procedures must never unduly restrict or eliminate competition. This is small businesses. This is the small business socioeconomic categories. This is large business. Anyone and everyone who can compete, competes, and let the best player win. That's full and open competition. And this is where all business should be progressing up to. This is when you start seeing the multi-billion-dollar procurements. Now, I have seen a couple small business multi-billion-dollar procurements, but most of them live in the full and open space, because you have the infrastructure, the resources, the financial capacity, the team, the processes. You can recruit, you can retain, you can equip your workforce. You normally have everything humming on all cylinders when you can compete and maintain your contracts at the full and open level. Remember, all contracts are fraught with risk. And at the full and open level, you understand those risks. You've dealt with the risk appropriately, either based on management strategy or pricing or some combination thereof. Maybe it's the technical proficiency of the teammates you've hired, but you understand the risk and the complexity, and you've managed those risks accordingly. You priced it accordingly. You put the proper protocols and procedures in place to win long term. You're not a novice in the game. You're able to compete and win and keep winning at this level. But that's all I want to talk about. So all I want to talk about in this video, I want to go through the 4 stages of government contracting success. I want to give you a process, a framework by which to look at this and to kind of put them in their right places. And I don't want you to snub your nose at any opportunity, especially for those people who are just getting started. You get opportunity wherever you can. And you do it legally and ethically, and don't do anything stupid on the journey. But I want you to find success, but I also want you to know kind of where you are in the grand framework. And I want you to go to the next level in a smart, efficient, and effective manner. I'm going to see you in a future video. Till next time.